They held her down on sacred ground, and the priestess tore the wolf from her chest. It did not come quietly. Hilda's body arched off the stone altar, every muscle locked in a seizure that had nothing to do with illness, and everything to do with something ancient being ripped from something older. The wolf. Her wolf. The beast that had run beside her blood since the day she was born, fought the separation with everything it had. Hilda could feel it clawing at the walls of her spirit, howling in a place no ear could reach, and she wanted to scream, wanted to beg them to stop, but her mouth wouldn't move, her eyes wouldn't open. The poison had stolen everything from her except the ability to feel, and so she felt it all. Every thread of the bond snapping like sinew pulled past breaking. The priestess's hands trembled, like sacred oil ran between her fingers, black as old blood in the torchlight, and her lips moved in a chant that was never meant for this, never meant to be spoken over an unwilling body. A woman who hadn't given consent, whose silence wasn't agreement but paralysis. Around the altar, the pack stood in a circle, warriors who had fought beside Hilda, elders who had sought her counsel, women who had braided her hair before battle and pressed herbs into her palms for luck. They watched, and not one of them moved to stop it. Alpha Dunstan stood closest, his arms crossed, his face arranged into something that looked like grief but wasn't. "Forgive us, Hilda," he said. His voice carried the weight of a man burdened by impossible choices, and every soul in that circle believed him. This is the only way. The wolf tore free. It came out of Hilda like breath leaving a dead woman. A rush of silver light that screamed through the clearing and slammed into Dunstan's chest with enough force to stagger him backward. For a moment, just a moment, two wolves existed inside him. His own dark presence and hers, bright, ferocious, untamed. Then his wolf lunged for dominance, and the fight began inside him where no one could see it. Dunstan gasped. His hands flew to his ribs. Something was wrong. He could feel her wolf thrashing against his, refusing to submit, refusing to bond. But the power, gods, the power was extraordinary. Strength flooded his limbs like nothing he'd ever known. He straightened, masking the pain, and turned to the pack with eyes that burned. "It's done," he said. On the altar, Hilda's body went still. Not the stillness of sleep, the stillness of something hollowed out, something emptied. The pack looked at what remained of her and looked away. No one asked if she was still breathing. 6 months earlier, the sword came down in a silver arc, and Hilda caught it on the flat of her blade without looking. The sparring yard erupted. Warriors pounded their fists against wooden shields, howling their approval as Hilda twisted under the blow, swept her opponent's legs, and planted a boot on his chest before he'd finished falling. Sweat ran down her temples. Dust coated the war braids that hung to her waist, dark hair threaded with small iron rings that clinked when she moved. She was breathing hard, but she was smiling. "Yield," she said. The warrior beneath her boot, Tormund, twice her size and 3 times her weight, laughed despite the blade hovering at his throat. I yield, God's woman, at least let me pretend I had a chance." Hilda sheathed her sword and pulled him to his feet. The yard was full this morning. Young wolves training with wooden swords, veterans sharpening technique, a cluster of children watching from the fence with wide eyes. This was the Ashenmoor pack at peace, or as close to peace as they ever came. Their territory sat at the junction of 3 hostile borders, a position that guaranteed conflict the way seasons guaranteed weather. Raiders from the south, territorial skirmishes from the east, and to the north, the Greyhound pack, led by the most feared alpha on the continent, a wolf called Beowulf, whose name alone could clear a battlefield. Hilda had fought them all, not because she loved war, because her people needed her. She came from the wolf warriors, a bloodline so old it lived in songs rather than records. The blood had thinned over generations in most lines, But in Hilda it had concentrated into something formidable. A pale silver beast with eyes like molten iron that moved through battle the way fire moved through dry grass. Whole packs had turned and fled at the sight of her shifting. She was also more than her wolf, and everyone at Ashenmore knew it. She sat at the council table not because of her bloodline, but because every person in that room trusted her judgment. And she'd spent years earning that seat with proof that strength without wisdom was just violence with better teeth. She was beautiful in the way that exhausted her. High cheekbones, a mouth permanently deciding between a smile and a bite, dark eyes that swallowed the torchlight. She wore it the way she wore armor. Functional. There. Refused to let it define her. "Another round?" Tormund asked, rubbing his chest where her boot had been. "Can't. The Alpha wants to ride the eastern border before noon." She found Dunstan at the stables, already mounted. He was a tall wolf, lean where Hilda was athletic, with a narrow face and clever eyes that missed nothing. He'd been Alpha for 3 years, inheriting the position after his father's death in a border raid, and in that time he'd leaned on Hilda more than any Alpha before him. She was his right hand, his war counsel, his most trusted companion. They'd ridden into battle together more times than either could count, and after every victory, Dunstan was always the first to find her. He swung a waterskin toward her as she mounted. "You demolished Tormund again." "He drops his left shoulder before every swing. I've told him 100 times. Dunstan laughed. "Maybe he likes losing to you." He studied her with an expression she'd grown used to over the years. Warm, easy, full of a respect that felt genuine. "The pack's lucky to have you, Hilda. I hope you know that." She did know that. It was one of the few things in her life she'd never had to question. They rode east, following the tree line where Ashenmore territory pressed against the wilds. The forest was quiet. Too quiet, Hilda noted, storing the observation for later. The scouts had reported movement near the river crossing, possibly a raiding party from the Black Hollow Pack testing their borders again. It was the kind of threat that never fully went away. Ashenmore existed in a state of permanent siege, surrounded by packs that wanted their land, their resources, their position. The only thing that had kept them safe for decades was the strength of their warriors, and the reputation of one warrior in particular. Hilda's name had traveled far beyond Ashenmore's borders. She was known across the northern territories as the Silver Wolf, a title she'd never asked for and couldn't shake. Alphas who'd never met her spoke of her in council meetings. Young warriors in distant packs trained harder because they'd heard stories of what she could do. Even the Greyhound Pack, Beowulf's people, the most ruthless fighters on the continent, referred to her with something that sounded less like hatred and more like grudging admiration. What Hilda didn't know, what she couldn't have known, because the man beside her had spent 3 years perfecting the mask, was that every word of praise Dunstan spoke was a nail in a coffin he was building for her. He watched her ride ahead, the sun catching the iron rings in her hair, and something dark moved behind his eyes. It had been there since the first battle they'd fought together, the one where Hilda's wolf had torn through an entire flank, while his own wolf struggled with a single opponent. He'd stood in the aftermath, blood drying on his hands, and watched the pack rush to Hilda. Hilda who was brilliant, Hilda who was untouchable, Hilda whose wolf made his look ordinary. The envy had started as a whisper. A small, reasonable voice that said he was the alpha, the leader, and yet every victory was credited to her. Over 3 years, the whisper had grown into something that paced behind his ribs like a caged animal. He didn't hate Hilda. That was the worst part. He admired her, just as everyone did. But admiration and envy are twins that share a womb, and Dunstan had fed the wrong one. He wanted her wolf. Not her, just the wolf. The raw, devastating power of that silver beast added to his own, making him not just an alpha, but the alpha, the most feared wolf alive, a name that would echo through history the way Hilda's echoed through campfire stories now. And 3 nights ago, during a trade negotiation with a healer from the southern marshes, Dunstan had found the means to take it. The vial was small, glass, dark as a bruise, sealed with wax. The healer had called it rootbane, a poison distilled from a fungus that grew on the roots of dead trees in cursed ground. It didn't kill quickly. It didn't kill at all, not at first. It crept through the body like winter creeping into autumn, slowing everything down. The heart, the lungs, the connection between wolf and host. Within weeks, the victim would appear to be dying of natural causes. No healer would find a trace. No suspicion would fall. Unless, of course, someone bribed the healers first. Dunstan carried the vial in his saddlebag, nestled between dried meat and a roll of clean bandages, and when they stopped at the river crossing to water the horses, he unstopped his own waterskin and poured the contents of the vial into Hilda's. She drank deeply when he offered it. "Thank you," she said, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. Her dark eyes met his, trusting, open, without a shadow of doubt. Dunstan smiled. Always. It began as a headache. 3 days after the ride, Hilda woke with a pressure behind her eyes that no amount of water or rest could shift. She ignored it. Warriors didn't stop for headaches. She trained that morning, sat in council that afternoon, and by evening the headache had spread into her joints, a dull, grinding ache that made her fingers clumsy on her sword hilt. By the end of the week, she couldn't hide it. The ache had deepened into something structural, something that felt like her bones were being slowly replaced with something heavier. Her wolf stirred uneasily inside her, pacing, agitated, as if sensing a threat it couldn't identify. Hilda's appetite vanished. Her sleep fractured into restless hours, punctuated by fevers that rose and fell without pattern. "You need rest," Dunstan told her, his face creased with concern so convincing it could have fooled the gods themselves. "I'm moving you into the Alpha's court. My personal healers will attend to you." Hilda protested. She had her own quarters, her own routines, her own stubborn insistence on independence. But when she tried to stand from her chair and her legs buckled, she allowed herself to be carried. Dunstan's court was comfortable, warm furs on the bed. A fire kept constant. Healers came and went, the finest in Ashenmoor, Dunstan assured her, and he wasn't lying about their credentials. They were exceptional healers. What Hilda didn't see were the private meetings that preceded each visit, the quiet conversations in Dunstan's study, where gold changed hands and threats were delivered with the calm precision of a man who had planned this for months. "You will examine her thoroughly," Dunstan told each healer. "You will find nothing. You will report that her condition is beyond your skill, and you will never speak of this meeting." The healers obeyed. Some out of greed. Some out of fear. One, an old woman named Tamsin, who had delivered half the children in Ashenmoor, obeyed because Dunstan told her that her granddaughter's apprenticeship depended on her cooperation, and Tamsin loved the girl more than she loved her own conscience. Weeks passed. Hilda deteriorated. The fevers became constant. Her body, once powerful enough to swing a war blade for hours without tiring, couldn't hold a cup without shaking. Her wolf had gone nearly silent, a faint pulse where there had once been a roar, a whisper where there had once been thunder. She lay in Dunstan's court, surrounded by comfort, attended by healers who pressed cool cloths to her forehead and spoke in grave, helpless tones, and she felt herself disappearing. The pack came to visit. Warriors who'd fought beside her stood at her bedside with red eyes and clenched jaws, unable to reconcile the woman in front of them with the one who'd led charges that turned tides. The elders came. The children she'd taught sword forms to came, bringing wildflowers they'd picked from the meadow. Hilda smiled at all of them and said nothing about the terror consuming her from the inside, the growing silence where her wolf had been. the creeping emptiness that felt less like dying and more like being erased. Dunstan was magnificent in his performance. He held her hand where others could see. He consulted with the healers publicly, his voice tight with barely contained emotion. He addressed the pack with updates that painted a picture of an alpha doing everything in his power to save his most valued warrior. "I've sent for healers from 3 territories," he announced in council, his voice heavy. "None have been able to identify the illness. Whatever this is, it's beyond anything we've encountered." The pack believed him because they had no reason not to. And then, when Hilda was too weak to speak, too weak to open her eyes, too weak to do anything except breathe in shallow, rattling gasps that sounded like a countdown, Dunstan called an emergency council. He stood before them with shadows under his eyes, real ones, because even guilt has a way of disturbing sleep, and delivered the blow. "Our enemies know," he said. "Word has reached the Black Hollow Pack. The Southern Raiders have been seen massing near the river. And the Greyhound Pack." He paused, letting the name do its work. Every spine in the room straightened. "Beowulf's scouts have been spotted on our northern border. They are watching. They are waiting." Fear moved through the room like smoke. "Hilda is dying," Dunstan continued, and his voice cracked on the word in a way that would have convinced anyone. "When she dies, we lose the strongest wolf this pack has ever known, and our enemies will come. Not one at a time. All of them. Together." The eldest council member, a wolf named Duskward, whose white hair and scarred hands spoke of decades of war, leaned forward. "What are you suggesting, Alpha?" Dunstan closed his eyes as if what he was about to say physically hurt him. "There is a way to preserve Hilda's wolf, to keep that strength within the pack, within me as your alpha, so that when the attacks come, I can protect you the way she would have." Silence. "You're talking about a wolf rip," Duskward said. His voice was flat with disbelief. "You want to rip the wolf from a living woman." The room erupted. Warriors shouted. An elder knocked his chair backward, standing up. The word barbaric was used more than once, and it wasn't strong enough. Wolf ripping was the darkest ritual in their history. A practice so reviled it existed only in cautionary tales told to frighten children. In the rarest cases, a dying wolf could consent to the transfer, offering their beast willingly as a final gift. But ripping a wolf from an unconscious body without consent wasn't a ritual. It was a violation. Dunstan let the outrage burn. He stood in the center of it, absorbing every accusation, every look of horror, and when the room had exhausted itself, he spoke quietly. "I know what this sounds like. I know what I'm asking. Do you think I want this?" His voice broke again, and this time his eyes glistened. "Hilda is my closest companion. She has fought beside me in every battle. Asking for this feels like cutting off my own hand." He paused. "But I need you to tell me, when the Greyhound Pack crosses our border, when Beowulf himself leads the charge, who will stop him? You?" He looked at the warriors. "You?" He looked at the elders. "Because I can't. Not as I am. Not without her wolf." The fear returned. Thicker this time. Heavier. "Our enemies won't hold back," Dunstan pressed. "They won't send raiding parties. They'll come with everything they have because for the first time in a generation, the Silver Wolf won't be standing in their way. Every family in this pack, every child, every elder, every soul you love, will be at the mercy of wolves who have none." The room went quiet. Not the quiet of peace, but the quiet of something breaking. Duskward stared at Dunstan for a long time. "And the priestess? Will she perform it?" Dunstan turned to the corner of the room where Priestess Era stood apart from the others, her face unreadable. She was young for her position, barely 30, but her authority over sacred rites was absolute. "This is against pack law," Era said. Her voice was clear and cold. "A wolf rip requires consent. Hilda cannot give consent." "Hilda is dying," Dunstan said. "The wolf will die with her." "That is her right." Dunstan didn't argue. Instead, he turned back to the pack. Priestess Era is correct. This decision cannot rest on my shoulders alone. It belongs to all of you. Every member of this pack must agree, or it doesn't happen. He was giving them the choice, making it their burden, spreading the guilt so thin that no single person would have to carry it alone. The silence stretched. Warriors looked at their hands. Elders looked at each other. Somewhere outside, a child laughed, and the sound was obscene in the weight of that room. "If we don't do this," a young warrior said, his voice barely above a whisper, "how many of us die when they come?" No one answered because the answer was all of them. Era watched the room. She could see the tide turning, could feel the moment when fear overwhelmed conscience, and it disgusted her. But she was bound by pack law as much as anyone. If the pack consented unanimously, she had no grounds to refuse. "I will ask once," she said, "and once only. Does this pack consent to the ripping of Hilda's wolf?" The first yes came from the young warrior, thin, ashamed, then another, then a third. They came slowly, each one heavier than the last, until the room filled with a chorus of voices that sounded nothing like agreement and everything like surrender. Era closed her eyes. Then it will be done. They carried Hilda's body to the sacred ground at moonrise. The altar was ancient stone, worn smooth by centuries of rituals that had never included anything like this. Torches burned in a circle. The pack gathered, silent, their faces caught between firelight and shadow. Hilda lay on the stone, her body so thin the bones showed through her skin. Her dark hair had been unbraided, spread around her head like a halo of ink. Her breathing was so shallow it was barely visible. And somewhere deep inside her, in the last quiet corner of consciousness the poison hadn't reached, Hilda felt them begin. She felt the priestess's hands. She felt the oil on her skin, cold and sharp with herbs that burned. She felt the chant vibrate through the stone beneath her, ancient words pulling at something fundamental, something that was her in a way her body had never been. And she felt her wolf wake up. For the first time in weeks, the beast inside her surged to life, not with strength, but with terror. It knew what was happening. It threw itself against the walls of Hilda's spirit, howling, clawing, fighting with everything it had left, which wasn't much, but was everything. Hilda wanted to scream. She wanted to open her eyes and look at these people. Her people, the ones she'd bled for, killed for, nearly died for a dozen times over, and ask them why. But the poison held her perfectly still, perfectly silently, she a prisoner in her own body while they reached inside her and took the only thing she had left. The wolf tore free, and Hilda felt the emptiness rush in to fill the space where it had been. Vast, cold, absolute. Like a sky with no stars, like a chest with no heartbeat, like a woman with no name. On the altar, her body went still, and not a single soul in that circle checked to see if she was still alive. Dunstan stood over her, Hilda's wolf thrashing inside his chest like a caged storm, and he looked down at the empty shell of the woman who had trusted him completely. "Prepare a pyre," he said. "She won't last the night." But Hilda's heart beat on, faint, stubborn, impossible, alive. 2 weeks after the ripping, Alpha Dunstan stood before the pack and told them Hilda was dead. He delivered the news at dawn, yet when the light was thin and grey, and the air carried the cold of the night before. He'd chosen the hour deliberately. Grief looks more convincing in bad light. "She fought," he said, his jaw tight, his eyes holding the distance of a man trying not to weep. Longer than any healer believed possible. But the illness was too much, and without her wolf to sustain her. He paused. "Hilda of Ashenmore is gone." The sound the pack made wasn't a gasp. It was something lower, something from the chest. A collective exhale carrying the shape of a wound. Warriors bowed their heads. Women pressed hands to their mouths. Children who didn't fully understand cried anyway because the adults around them were breaking. Dunstan's healers confirmed it. Tamsin, the old woman who had delivered half the pack's children, stood beside the Alpha and stated in a voice stripped of everything except exhaustion that she had examined Hilda's body herself. The heart had stopped. The lungs were still. She didn't look at anyone when she said it. The pack believed because they needed to. Because the alternative, that they had ripped the wolf from a woman who might have survived, that their fear had killed the very person who'd kept them safe, was a truth too heavy to carry. But not everyone found it easy. Duskward sat alone in his quarters that morning and stared at the wall. He'd been one of the voices that said yes. He could still taste the cowardice in it. The young warrior who'd spoken first stopped training altogether. Hollow-eyed, flinching whenever anyone spoke her name. Guilt doesn't announce itself. It simply follows, patient and tireless, until the distance between you and it disappears. And inside Dunstan's chest, Hilda's wolf continued to fight. 2 weeks since the transfer, and the wolves had not bonded. Every shift was agony. 2 beasts pulling in opposite directions, his wolf snarling for dominance while Hilda's slashed and bit and refused to yield. In battle form, he was monstrous, irradiating a power that made other wolves lower their eyes. But the power was fractured, unstable, like holding a blade by the wrong end. At night, when the pack slept, Dunstan pressed his fists against his ribs and felt the war inside him. Hilda's wolf wasn't just resisting, it was punishing him. Every surge of stolen strength came wrapped in pain. He told no one. The funeral pyre was built in the meadow beyond the eastern gate. Rowan wood, traditional for warriors, laid in the pattern of a shield, because that was what Hilda had been. Her body was carried on a litter draped with gray fur, armor polished to a shine she would have found absurd, wildflowers in her hair, daisies and blue thistle, from the children who had watched her spar and thought she was the strongest thing alive. Dunstan stood at the head, torch in hand. He never got the chance to light it. The riders appeared on the northern ridge without warning. 6 of them, tight formation, their horses dark against the pale sky. Warriors reached for weapons. Mothers pulled children close, because the banner at the front was one every wolf in Ashenmoor recognized. The greyhound on a black field. Beowulf's sigil. The lead rider dismounted 30 paces out. Beowulf was not what the stories prepared you for. The tales spoke of a monster, a wolf so savage he'd torn an alpha's spine out with bare hands. But the man who walked toward the pyre was quiet. Tall, broad through the chest in a way that spoke of decades of real combat, with a weathered face and eyes the color of deep water. Dark hair cut short, no ornamentation. He moved with the economy of a man who'd learned long ago that wasted motion gets you killed. "I've come to pay my respects to the Silver Wolf," he said. "She was my opponent, but she was a worthy one. No wolf I've fought earned my attention the way she did." His eyes moved to the litter, and something private shifted in his expression. "I'd like to use her death to build something she would have valued. Peace. A formal treaty, binding and permanent. All I ask is that you give me her body to honor on my own land." Dunstan's response was immediate. "No." He squared his shoulders, letting stolen power radiate through the clearing. "Her body stays with us." But a voice rose from behind him. "Wait." Duskward stepped forward, leaning on his staff. "I knew Hilda longer than anyone here. She pursued peace over war every single time she had the choice. If Beowulf offered a treaty that would keep her people safe, she would take it." He looked at Dunstan. "She would want this." The pack shifted. Duskward's words touched something Dunstan's performance couldn't reach. Real memory. Hilda arguing for diplomacy. Hilda staying a warrior's blade when mercy was possible. Hilda choosing, again and again, the path that kept her people alive. Hilda would want peace. Let him take her. Dunstan had no choice. Fine, take her. Beowulf walked to the litter and lifted Hilda's body himself, one arm beneath her shoulders, the other beneath her knees. And as he did, he felt it. Warmth. Not the fading warmth of a body recently dead. Sustained heat. Faint but real. His arms tightened. His eyes dropped to her lips, the faintest trace of color, and to her chest, which, if you watched closely, rose and fell in a rhythm so shallow it was nearly invisible. He said nothing. He carried her to his horse, and the column rode north without looking back. Beowulf rode through the night, Hilda held across his saddle, her heartbeat against his forearm the entire way. Faint, thread-like, stubborn. The Greyhound compound sat in a valley between granite ridges. He carried her straight to the healing quarters and laid her on a bed with a care that would have confused anyone who believed the stories about him. Helga, the chief healer, pressed fingers to Hilda's throat. Her heartbeat is barely present. The wolf presence, the second pulse every shifter carries, it's gone. Osric examined Hilda's fingernails, her veins. There's a toxin, slow-acting, plant-based, nearly metabolized. We can purge it. The wolf, though, whatever happened is beyond our medicine. Only a priestess with the old knowledge could do this, and none exist in our pack. Focus on what you can fix, Beowulf said. Keep her alive. Whatever you need, name it. And then Beowulf stayed. Not occasionally, not the way alphas visit the sick to be seen visiting them. He came every day without exception. He brought clean water heated over the hearth, and cloths he wrung out himself. He bathed her face with slow, careful strokes, working around the hollows of her temples, where the skin had gone paper-thin. He cleaned the fever sweat from her neck and changed the linens when they soaked through, lifting her body with the same steadiness he'd used to carry her from the pyre. His hands, which had crushed throats and broken shields, moved across her skin with a gentleness that made the healers look away. Not from discomfort, but from the privacy of it. Helga caught him once speaking to Hilda in a low murmur, telling her about the weather, the training yard, the fox stealing chickens from the east pen, talking as if she could hear him, as if a voice might give her something to follow back. He told himself it was respect, that a warrior of her caliber deserved better than dying unwashed in a stranger's bed. But respect doesn't make your chest tight when her breathing falters at midnight. Respect doesn't keep you in a hard chair until your back aches, because you're afraid to leave in case something changes while you're gone. Days turned to weeks, weeks to months. The poison cleared slowly. Osric's bitter tinctures dripped between her lips, poultices drawing the toxin through her skin in dark, foul-smelling sweat. Hilda's heartbeat strengthened. Color crept back into her face in increments, like dawn through heavy cloud. Her fingers, which had been cold and waxy for weeks, warmed under his touch. And then, on a morning when the first snow dusted the granite ridges, Hilda opened her eyes. The first thing she saw was a ceiling she didn't recognize. The second was the man sitting beside her bed. Large, dark-haired, deep-water eyes watching her with an expression she couldn't read. Then the fog lifted, and she recognized him. Her body surged upward. Her hand shot for a weapon that wasn't there. She hit the edge of the bed and would have fallen if Beowulf hadn't caught her arm. She wrenched free, stumbling backward until her spine hit the wall, crouching there, shaking, teeth bared. A snarl that came from her body rather than her wolf, because her wolf was gone. The realization hit like a fist. She reached inward for the presence that had lived inside her since birth and found nothing. A hollow so vast it swallowed everything. A sky with no stars. "What did you do to me?" The words came out raw, a voice unused for months cracking on every syllable. Beowulf hadn't moved. His hands were open on his knees, deliberately unthreatening. "I didn't do anything to you. Where is my wolf? If you don't tell me what you've done, I will kill you and every wolf in this compound." "You can try," Beowulf said quietly. "But you should eat something first. You've been unconscious for 2 months, and you'll need your strength if you're planning to murder an entire pack." It wasn't what she expected. The calm, the lack of posturing, the ghost of something that might have been humor. It threw her just enough that the killing momentum faltered, and exhaustion rushed in. Her legs buckled. She slid down the wall, and she hated him for seeing it. Helga entered with broth. Hilda knocked the cup away. Helga refilled it and held it out again without a flicker of irritation. "You've been poisoned," Helga said. "We've spent 2 months purging a toxin that should have killed you. You are alive because our Alpha carried you from your funeral pyre and asked us to save you. Whatever was done to your wolf was done before you came to us." Beowulf stood and left without looking back, giving her the one thing she needed more than answers: space. Recovery was brutal. Without her wolf, Hilda healed at the pace of a human, and it felt like crawling to a woman who'd spent her life running. But she didn't escape. Partly because she was too weak. Partly because she had nowhere to go. And partly, though she would have denied it, because of Beowulf. He gave her distance. But he sent food. Real food, not invalid's broth. Roasted meat, fresh bread, fruit from the southern trade routes, and with each delivery came a small, practical gesture. A warmer blanket when nights turned cold, boots that fit her feet exactly, a bone comb, because her hair had matted during the months of unconsciousness, and she'd been tearing at it with her fingers. He never asked for gratitude. He never asked for anything. The first time she sought him out, she found him in the training yard, sparring with 3 warriors simultaneously, and winning without showmanship. He fought the way he spoke, efficient, unhurried, precise. "Tell me the truth," she said. "All of it." So he told her. Plainly, without embellishment. His scouts reporting her illness, the funeral, his decision to attend, lifting her body and feeling the warmth. "Dead wolves aren't warm," he said, "so I made a choice. You could have told my pack I was alive. Your Alpha had declared you dead and your pack had built you a pyre. If they wanted you dead badly enough to burn you, telling them you were alive wouldn't have made you safe." The words landed like a blade between her ribs, because he was right. "Why save me at all?" she asked. "We're enemies." Beowulf was quiet. "We were never enemies. We were warriors doing what our packs demanded. The battlefield is a place where you kill or you die. It doesn't make you enemies. It makes you opponents." He paused. "I've admired you since the first time you nearly took my head off. That's not an enemy. That's something worth preserving." She searched his face for the lie, for the mask every Alpha she'd known had worn. She found nothing but steady eyes, and a jaw set with the stubbornness of a man who meant exactly what he said. She turned and walked away. Not from anger, because she didn't know what to do with what she was feeling, and walking was easier than standing still with it. The weeks that followed dismantled everything Hilda had believed. She watched Beowulf with his pack and saw a man who bore no resemblance to the monster she'd been taught to fear. He trained as an equal. He listened to his elders with genuine attention. When a young warrior made a mistake that nearly cost 2 lives, Beowulf didn't punish him. He sat with the boy for an hour, teaching rather than tearing down. His people didn't fear him. They loved him, and it was the real thing, built on years of kept promises and fair judgments. Hilda began taking meals with the pack. A healer invited her to sort herbs. A warrior asked her opinion on a sword grip. A child climbed into her lap beside the fire and fell asleep. And Hilda held the child and felt something crack open in her chest she'd been holding shut for months. she started seeing Beowulf as the man beneath the legend. The way he laughed, rare, surprised, a sound that cracked his weathered face open and showed someone younger underneath. The way he remembered every name, every family, every child's birthday in a pack of hundreds. The way he stood in the rain watching his warriors train and didn't move for an hour because a sparrow had built a nest in the eave above him and he didn't want to disturb it. The way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching. Not with pity. Not with desire. With something quieter, something that felt like recognition, as if he'd been searching a long time for something he'd only just found. Love didn't arrive with thunder. It came the way dawn came to the valley. Slowly, inevitably, filling spaces she hadn't known were empty. She stopped cataloging exits. She started noticing instead the way his voice dropped half a register when he said her name, the way his hand lingered near hers without quite touching, as if the distance between their fingers was something sacred he wouldn't cross, until she told him he could. One night, after the fire had burned low and the pack had gone to their quarters, Hilda found herself standing beside Beowulf on the rampart, and close enough that the heat of his arm warmed her shoulder through her cloak. Neither of them spoke. The stars were sharp and cold, and the valley below was silver with frost. And Hilda realized with a certainty that settled into her bones that this man, this enemy, this monster from campfire stories, this wolf who had carried her from death and asked nothing in return, was the safest place she had ever stood. And one evening, she told him she was going back. "I need to know why," she said. "I need to hear it from them." Beowulf nodded. "I know. Will you come with me?" He looked at her then, open, certain, fierce in its quiet way, and it was the most honest expression she'd ever seen on any living soul. "Try to stop me," he said. They rode out at dawn, side by side, with greyhound warriors at their backs. The road south cut through winter forests, bare trees black against a white sky, and Hilda rode in silence, feeling the empty place inside her pulse with every hoofbeat. When the Ashenmoor gates appeared on the horizon, when sentries saw the greyhound banner and the woman riding beside its alpha and the horns began to sound, Hilda felt something stir in the hollow where her wolf had been. Not the wolf itself. Something older. Something that had survived the poison, the ripping, the betrayal, the months of emptiness. Something that felt very much like war. The gates of Ashenmoor opened slowly, as if the iron itself was reluctant. Hilda rode through them with her spine straight and her eyes forward, and the pack that had burned an effigy of her body 3 months ago stared at her like she was a ghost rising from the ash. Which, she supposed, she was. The courtyard filled with silence first. Then whispers. Then the kind of noise that happens when hundreds of people try to process the impossible at once. Gasps layered over murmurs, layered over the sharp intake of breath that sounds like pain. Warriors who had pounded shields for her in the sparring yard stood frozen, their faces cycling through recognition, disbelief, and something worse than both. Guilt. It moved through the crowd like a sickness, settling into the lines around mouths, and the way eyes dropped to the ground rather than meet hers. Hilda saw all of it. She catalogued every flinch, every averted gaze, every jaw that tightened with the effort of not speaking. These were the people she had bled for, the families she had stood in front of when the borders broke, and the children she had taught to hold a blade, the elders whose counsel she had valued above her own. They had ripped her wolf from her body while she lay paralyzed, and then they had tried to burn the evidence. Beowulf rode beside her, his greyhound warriors fanned behind them in disciplined formation. He said nothing. His presence said enough. The most feared alpha on the continent had brought the silver wolf home, and the implications of that were settling over Ashenmoor like the shadow of a blade. Dunstan appeared on the steps of the great hall. He looked wrong. That was the first thing Hilda noticed. He was gaunt where he'd been lean, shadows living under his eyes, his skin carrying a gray undertone like meat left too long in cold storage. When he moved, there was a stiffness, a controlled wince with every step, as if something was biting him from the inside, and he was using every scrap of will to keep it from showing. Hilda's wolf was killing him. She could see it now. The stolen wolf had never bonded with Dunstan's. It had never stopped fighting. And every time he drew on that borrowed strength, the wolf inside him tore something else. Muscle, tendon, the walls of his heart. He was being eaten alive by the very thing he'd taken, and the irony would have been satisfying if Hilda could feel anything beyond the cold clarity that had settled over her the moment she'd ridden through those gates. Hilda. Dunstan's voice was steady, but his hands weren't. He gripped the railing of the steps, knuckles white. This is unexpected. I imagine it is, Hilda said. She didn't dismount. She sat her horse and looked down at him, and the geometry of it, her above, him below, was not lost on either of them. You told them I was dead, Dunstan. You were dying, the healers confirmed. The healers lied. Her voice carried across the courtyard, clear and level, pitched for every ear. I wasn't dead when you announced my death. I wasn't dead when you laid my body on the pyre. The man standing beside me carried me from that pyre, and I was warm. My heart was beating. My lungs were breathing. You knew. You knew, and you tried to burn me anyway. The courtyard went silent. Not the silence of shock. They'd passed through shock the moment she'd ridden in. This was the silence of people hearing a truth they'd already suspected, spoken aloud for the first time. Dunstan straightened. Everything I did was for this pack. Everything you did was for yourself. She dismounted then. The impact of her boots on the packed earth sent a jolt through her legs, and for a moment she felt the absence of her wolf so acutely it nearly buckled her. The missing strength, the missing speed, of the missing fire that should have been roaring through her veins. She was a warrior standing in her own courtyard without the thing that had made her extraordinary, and it took everything she had to keep walking. But she kept walking. You poisoned me, she said, each word placed with the precision of a blade finding the gap between ribs. You bribed the healers to let me die. You used my illness to frighten the pack into a ripping that should never have happened. And then you stole my wolf while I lay unconscious, unable to consent, unable to do anything except feel it being torn out of me. She stopped 3 paces from the steps. Tell me I'm wrong. Stand there in front of every soul in this pack and tell me I'm wrong. Dunstan's jaw worked. For a moment, a single, brittle moment, something honest moved across his face. Fear, not of Hilda, not of Beowulf, but of the truth and what it would do to the story he'd built around himself. Then the mask came back. You don't understand what I was facing, he said, and his voice shifted into the register Hilda remembered from the council meeting, the one designed to sound burdened rather than guilty. You were dying. The pack was exposed. Our enemies were circling, waiting for the moment we showed weakness. I did what any alpha would do. I preserved our strength. I kept our people alive. You kept yourself alive, Hilda said. You wanted my wolf. You've wanted it since the first battle we fought together, since the first time the pack cheered for me instead of you. Everything else, the poison, the healers, the fear, was theater. You engineered every piece of it so you could stand here with my power in your chest and call yourself a hero. The pack stirred. She could feel them shifting, rearranging, the first cracks appearing in whatever story they'd been telling themselves for 3 months. Then Tamsin stepped forward. The old healer moved through the crowd the way old women move when they've stopped caring about consequences. Slowly, deliberately, with a spine made rigid by something that might have been courage or might have been the simple exhaustion of carrying a lie too long. She stopped at the base of the steps and looked up at Dunstan, and the expression on her face was one Hilda had never seen from her. Contempt. She's right about the bribery, Tamsin said, addressing the pack rather than the Alpha. Every healer who examined Hilda was paid or threatened or both. I was told my granddaughter's apprenticeship would be revoked if I didn't confirm what the Alpha wanted confirmed. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice cracked. We could have saved her. The poison was identifiable. It was treatable. We were ordered not to treat it. The courtyard erupted. Voices crashed over each other. Outrage, disbelief, accusation. Because if the healers had been bribed, then Hilda had never been beyond saving, which meant the ripping had never been necessary, which meant they had consented to the violation of a woman based on a lie. Dunstan's composure fractured. She's lying. I'm not lying, Tamsin said, and the steel in her voice silenced him. And I'm not the only one. 2 more healers stepped forward, then a third. Each confirmed the same thing. Payments, threats, instructions to report Hilda's condition as untreatable. One of them, a young man whose hands shook, produced a small glass vial from his belt. Dark as a bruise. Rootbane, he said. That was what we diagnosed, and he asked us to hide it. The pack went quiet again, but this quiet was different. This was the quiet before violence. Priestess Era moved through the crowd. The reluctance that had weighted her movements during the ripping was gone, replaced by something coiled and purposeful. She'd been waiting for this. I warned you, Era said, speaking not to Dunstan but to the pack. I told you consent was required. You chose fear over law, and this is what it bought you? She turned to Hilda. I can reverse it. The wolf can be pulled from Dunstan and returned to you. But he won't survive. His body is already failing. The wolf has been tearing him apart since the transfer. Pulling it out will finish what it started. No. Dunstan's voice came out raw, stripped of every layer of performance he'd been wearing. He backed up the steps, his hands raised. No, you can't. The pack needed Hilda, Duskward said, stepping forward, his staff striking the cobblestones like a judge's gavel. He looked older than he had 3 months ago, the weight of what he'd done carved into every line of his face. I carry the blame alongside every wolf who said yes, Duskward said. I knew it was wrong, and I said yes anyway because I was afraid. That fear cost us the finest warrior this pack has ever known. It cost us our honor and our law. He looked at Dunstan. The ripping will be reversed, the wolf will be returned, and whatever comes of it, we will face as the consequence of what we chose. Dunstan tried to run. He made it 3 steps before the warriors closed on him. Hands seized his arms, his shoulders, his legs. He fought, thrashing, trying to shift. But the 2 wolves inside him were locked in a war that made his body seize rather than change. They pressed him to the ground, and his screams echoed off the stone walls. I am your Alpha. I kept you safe. No one answered. The words fell into silence the way stones fall into deep water. Swallowed, gone. Ira knelt beside Hilda. Lie down, she said, close to him. The wolf needs to feel you. It needs to know where to go. Hilda lay on the cold ground beside the man who had betrayed her. She could hear his ragged breathing. I could smell the sour sweat of fear and decay coming off his skin. This close, she could feel her wolf. A faint vibration, a distant howl, a presence calling to her from inside a prison of stolen flesh. It recognized her. Even after 3 months of captivity inside a body that wasn't its home, it recognized her. She closed her eyes. Era began the chant. The same words, the same ancient cadence, but reversed. A mirror image of the ritual that had torn Hilda apart on the altar. Sacred oil touched Hilda's chest, cold and sharp, and the chant built in layers, each phrase pulling at something fundamental, something that existed between body and spirit where language couldn't follow. Dunstan screamed. The wolf came out of him the way it had come out of Hilda, violently, unwillingly from the host, a tearing that was spiritual and physical at once. But this time, the wolf wasn't fighting the extraction. It was racing toward it, toward her, toward the only home it had ever known. Silver light erupted from Dunstan's chest and slammed into Hilda's. The impact arched her off the ground, every nerve ignited. The wolf flooded back into her, not gently, not gradually, but all at once. A roaring cascade of light and fury and relief that filled every hollow, sealed every wound, erased every empty silence she'd endured for 3 months. She could feel it. Her wolf. Alive, whole, fierce beyond anything she remembered. It pressed against the walls of her spirit with the desperate joy of return. And Hilda pressed back, welcoming it, of feeling the bond snap into place with a click that only she could hear. She opened her eyes. The world was sharper, brighter, louder. She could smell every body in the courtyard, hear every heartbeat, feel the texture of the wind against her skin. She was whole. Beside her, Dunstan was still. His eyes were open, but they saw nothing. The gray undertone of his skin had deepened into something final, and his chest neither rose nor fell. The wolf had been the only thing keeping him alive, and without it, his body had simply stopped. No dramatic last words, no final confession. Just a man who had traded everything for power and ended up with nothing at all. Hilda stood. The pack watched her. Hundreds of faces carrying every shade of guilt and awe and fear and hope. And she let them look. Let them see her standing where Dunstan had fallen, whole and wolfed and alive despite everything they had done to ensure she wouldn't be. "Build a pyre," she said. They built it in the meadow, in the same place they'd built hers. Rowan wood, shield pattern. They placed Dunstan's body on the logs, and Hilda lit the fire herself, standing close enough to feel the heat on her face, watching the flames take the man who had been her alpha, her companion, and her destroyer. She felt nothing. No satisfaction, no grief, no anger. Just the clean, empty clarity of something finished. When the fire had burned to embers, she turned to the pack. "I'm not coming back." The words fell like a blade. Duskward closed his eyes. Warriors who'd held Dunstan down stared at her with stricken faces. A child near the back of the crowd began to cry, and the sound was small and terrible in the vastness of the meadow. "You were my people," Hilda said. "I gave this pack everything I had, my strength, my counsel, my blood, my wolf. And when the first test came, the first moment you had to choose between protecting me and protecting yourselves, you chose yourselves." "Hilda," Duskward began. "I don't blame you for being afraid," she continued, "but you let a man poison me, bribe your healers, and rip my wolf from my body while I lay unable to speak. Then you tried to burn me." She shook her head. "I have killed for this pack. I have nearly died for this pack. But I will not belong to a pack that isn't worth dying for." She turned her back on them. It was the hardest thing she'd ever done, and she did it without hesitation. Werewolf was waiting at the gates, mounted, his expression steady and certain in the way that only his could be. Hilda swung onto her horse beside him, and their eyes met. And in that look was everything. Understanding, respect. The quiet certainty of two people who had found each other by the most improbable road imaginable. "Take me home," she said. "You are home," he answered. They rode north. The balcony of Beowulf's castle overlooked the valley where the greyhound pack lived. Stone houses and training yards and gardens that caught the evening light like cupped gold. Below, the sounds of a pack at peace drifted upward. Children chasing each other. A blacksmith's hammer. Laughter from the hall. Hilda leaned against the stone railing, her war braids loose, her armor traded for a linen shirt that smelled like the herbs Helga kept in the healing quarters. Her wolf hummed inside her chest, whole, settled, at peace. The evening air carried the scent of pine and wood smoke, and she breathed it in and let it fill the last of the spaces that had been empty for so long. She heard Beowulf before she saw him. His footsteps on the stone, unhurried as always. He stood beside her, close enough that the heat of his body warmed her shoulder, and they looked out at the valley in a silence that needed no words. "Regrets?" he asked. She thought of Ashenmore, of the faces she'd turned her back on. The meadow where Dunstan's pyre had burned, embers drifting into a sky that didn't care about betrayal or justice. "No," she said, "not one." He turned to her, and the expression on his face was the one she'd learned to read over months. Not the mask of an alpha, but the honest, unguarded look of a man who had found something he hadn't known he was looking for. He cupped her face in his hands. Those hands, scarred, calloused, strong enough to break bone, held her like she was the most important thing he'd ever touched. "The first time I fought you," he said, his voice dropping into that low register that made her chest vibrate. "I spent 3 days thinking about the way you moved. I told myself it was tactical analysis." Hilda smiled. "Was it? Not even close." She laughed, a real laugh, full and warm, the kind she'd forgotten the shape of. And Beowulf's face transformed the way it always did, the weathered lines softening, and she thought she could spend the rest of her life learning every version of that face. He kissed her, slow, deliberate. The way he did everything, no wasted motion, just the honest pressure of his mouth against hers, and the warmth of his hands on her face, and the unhurried certainty of a man who had waited months, and would have waited months more if she'd needed him to. Hilda kissed him back. Her hands found his chest, feeling the heartbeat beneath her palms. Strong, steady, singular. One wolf, one heart. Just Beowulf. The man who had carried her from a pyre and asked for nothing except the chance to see her open her eyes. When they parted, the valley was filling with blue dusk, and stars were beginning to show. Hilda pressed her face into his neck and breathed him in, iron and pine and the faint sweetness of mead, and felt her wolf settle deeper, hurling into the bond forming between her and this impossible, patient man who had seen her at her emptiest and treated her like she was still whole. She thought of what she'd told the Ashenmore pack, that she wouldn't belong to a pack that wasn't worth dying for. She'd found one that was. Thank you for listening to this story. If you enjoyed it and want to hear more stories like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Drop a comment and tell me what you thought. I read every single one, and I'll see you in the next one.